message. I'm going to be doing a few of these for Copperton, as I always do every year. This time it's going to be digital and not in person in the Lions Club, so I apologize for that. But just for COVID reasons, just to make sure everyone's safe. Hopefully it'll be as well attended as it was. But we will go ahead and post the recording on my video as well as, or on my page, as well as I'm sure that Deborah will also be putting it on hers as well. So welcome. Deborah, she is running for County Council, District 2 for an open seat vacated by the former Mike Jensen, who was not my favorite person. So I'm very happy to see that seat being opened up. She's graciously accepted my invitation to come and speak to Copperton. And we'll go ahead and get started by just letting her introduce herself and tell us what inspires her to run.
Thanks so much, Apollo. I appreciate that. I appreciate this opportunity to meet with a few folks from your community, even if it's in name only via Zoom. I did drive around Copperton just before I came back to school, and I have to say you have it's a quaint little small town. It took me back to some of the other places I've lived in my life that were just small and a tight-knit community, and that's something to be protected for sure. As far as the introduction for myself, I am a military brat. I grew up all over the place. My family settled here in Utah, gosh, when I was almost 16. So that was 1994. So I've aged a bit since then. In my own life, I've been in and out of Utah, mostly here since then. Settled in the Valley about 12 years ago when I got my first full-time teaching job after a deployment. So I've got a military background, both growing up and in my own life. I've got 21 years of service in the National Guard myself. I'm a Black Hawk pilot with the Utah Guard. I've been deployed, spent time in a combat zone, and that's very core to my identity. And then I'm also teaching full-time in Granite District at Hunter High School in West Valley, and I've been teaching for 12 years. So that's sort of the resume. Grew up in a very conservative family, LDS, but living here on the West Side and working in the communities that I have, I've gotten to see and understand a lot of different perspectives that have helped me recognize the ability to, where they say, two sides of a story, but really there's more than that. And to really understand any kind of problems, you've got to get all of the input from all of the viewpoints. So that's important to me. That's how I approach problems in life. As far as running for office, this is not something that I had planned. A year ago, if you told me I'd be doing this, I would have laughed at you because it would have been completely nuts. But hey, it's 2020, right? And we were watching the pandemic develop in my geography classes because it fits into my curriculum really well. And of course, for my military intelligence duties in the National Guard, I do pay attention to the international news. So watching it start in China and how they reacted was interesting, and then seeing it spread into other parts of Asia, and then into Europe, and then it's in New York, and it's in California and Washington. I recognized that it was going to get pretty bad, and it was going to affect us here. And so I told the kids, and we'll probably end up shut down. We'll probably do a distance learning. Those things happened. My school was actually the first school to get quarantined in March. So this has just been a barrel of fun. But we got through that. My AP students still did well on their tests. I'm very proud of that. They, survived the earthquake. I live right near Magna, so it's been quite a year. But with that developing, I recognized that this was going to have long-term implications, not just be bad for this year, but as far as the economic fallout for quite some time. And with my historical perspective as a social studies teacher, and then my military training and experience with, understanding difficult problems and coming up with solutions and plans to move forward so that we can accomplish what we need to. That skill set is unique, and that skill set is really valuable at a time like this. And so I recognize that at a time like this, it's time for me to step up and serve in a new way. And so that's why I'm running for office. Local government is where I can make the biggest impact, the biggest difference, and help people not just get through this, but come out better on the other side. So that's what I aim to do.
Well, fantastic. Thank you very much. With you running for office, let's say that you get elected, which I hope you have a good chance of doing. What priorities do you have that you want to accomplish while you serve on the county council?
Yeah, absolutely. Fair question. So District 2 being, of course, the entire west side of the valley, this is where we have almost all the undeveloped land that's left. And so it's really crucial as we move forward that we get development right. So what does that look like? It needs to be smart and sustainable growth that needs to be balanced, right? It's not just, okay, well, there's space, so let's just build like crazy. Let's just build high density. Let's just build, these things that are going to make us a quick buck right now. We need to be thinking long term. So how do we manage the water? How do we manage the transportation? How do we manage the balance of residential and commercial? And what can we sustain and still maintain a good quality of life, while also recognizing that, yeah, we've got an affordable housing problem, we've got air quality issues and transportation issues, and we have to think about all of these things and be smart about sequencing and timing, right? So certain things are going to happen, but they need to happen in the right order. So as far as master planning and what development looks like and the mix of residential and where you have density and where you don't, and making sure you get that right mix of housing too, as well as the jobs in the right places of the right time that are sustainable long term, so that we can maintain and improve our quality of life, while at the same time addressing the ever-present issue of air quality, right? We have actually made a ton of progress improving air quality over the last decade or so, while our population has increased, which is commendable, but we still have major problems, especially in the winter. Now, the California wildfire smoke, there's nothing we can do about that, but the inversion in the winter, there are things we can do, and that's, again, talking about development and growth. We've got to get older cars off the road, replace them with more efficient cars, not really a county issue, but thinking statewide, big picture. Since this is where so many of us live, we've got to address that. And with water too, right? If we're going to put a whole bunch of people down at the south end of the valley, or we're going to develop a huge port here at the north end of the valley, we've got to consider our water management and our water use. I don't know if you've seen the study that just came out, but the Great Salt Lake is in crisis. It's shrinking, and I've actually been watching that from the air for about a decade in absolute horror, because you can really see year from year how it's getting smaller. It reminds me of what we study in geography with the Aral Sea, which used to be one of the largest inland lakes in the world, and now is basically a puddle, and completely devastated the economy of that region, which is climatically quite similar to ours, and had a lot of other negative effects that, speaking of air quality, that lake dries up. There's a bunch of silt with all kinds of garbage that has flowed into it for 150 plus years that's going to get blown around in the summer with the winds, and that's just going to be terrible too. So kind of big picture thinking, how do we protect the environment while we develop and meet people's needs, and build in the parks, build in the trails, get the right mix of housing, the right mix of jobs, thinking long term. So that's really the biggest, most important thing, I think, for District 2, just because of where we're positioned.
So if I might just expand on that, not to put you on the spot, but
Sure.
I'm a big, I've been known to venture out to the Great Salt Lake. What solutions can we have, do you think, to protect the Great Salt Lake, other than, because I see the dredging, they fundraise for the dredging of the marina every year, but that's not really protecting the lake.
Not long term.
Yeah, right. So what do you see?
Well, the report that came out actually had a list of 12 things that were recommendations that are going to cost money. And so there's a survey out that all of you can and should respond to. I'll be happy to share the link with you afterwards, in terms of what should we do. Some of the things that we're going to have to consider is our long-term water use. I remember in 2005, I was on my way back from flight school, stopped in Vegas to see some cousins, and they were literally ripping out their front yard because the city was paying them $1 a square foot to get rid of the grass. The price of water went up. Of course, we're second driest state in the country, and Nevada is first. So we have a water problem, especially as we see pressure from increased population. So we're not necessarily going to be able to keep all having nice, big, green, lush lawns in this climate. It's just not sustainable with population increasing and the amount of precipitation that we're getting decreasing and changing from snow, which is where we store up our water in the mountains, into rain. We're going to have less water, we're going to have more people, and we're just going to have to manage it better. So I see xeriscaping at some point in our future, just as an example. Another proposal that I've heard talked about that I actually kind of like is changing the law for water rights, where right now, if you don't use your full share, you essentially lose it and it can go to somebody else because it has to be put to beneficial use. So really, if the water is allowed to flow into the lake, that should be considered a beneficial use and not count against the water right holder. So that's just a couple of examples that we need to think about. But that survey is something that I would definitely encourage everybody to take a look at and respond to, because that's going to shape our priorities and our policies as a state moving forward.
Great. Thank you. That's a great answer. So, a big concern for Copperton is the role of the county in our municipal governance. So we, in 2004, just to give you a little bit of background, 2004, we were given a survey from the University of Utah, a sustainability survey. It was 6 unincorporated areas at the time. Now, and the only one that they found, or the only 2 that they thought would be sustainable with the boundaries proposed, would have been Bluffdale and Copperton. We sent back that we decided we did not want to be a municipality. It's less because of revenue. We don't bring any revenue in. It's because we use all services.
Okay,
and in 2008, they again came back to us and asked us if we would be willing to incorporate. We said no. We still were not interested in incorporating. We were satisfied with how it was. Some of us were. I was actually on the minority on that one. And then in 2014, working into 2015, they finally passed SB 199. So we'll get into SB 199 in more detail later, but the question that I have right now is, what, with this new hybrid form of government, what role do you think the county should play in our municipal governance?
So I think words matter and wording matters. And what you've asked is what role the county should play in the municipal government. So
yes,
Copperton and any other metro township has a metro township council and mayor and should be able to run their own government and manage their own affairs. Now, that being said, I understand that the municipal services district is how the resources are sort of being managed that were previously provided strictly by the county. Now it's through another entity, and that entity needs to be responsive to the needs of the metro township. The county should be a partner. It should be an enabler. It shouldn't be a bully by any sense of the word. And if there's areas where the county has efficiency because of economies of scale, like with libraries across the county system, and people want to participate in that, then that's great. But it should always be that the county is providing services to and is responsive to the needs of the municipal government, whatever form that is.
Very good. So to expand on that a little bit, we are, so currently I guess they did change that. Never mind. I'm sorry. I'm looking at my notes. They did change the mayor. The county mayor used to be the executive for the municipal services district, and they actually have changed that. So that's not a good expansion. All right. Okay. So question number 4. So yeah, it is expanding on that. What is your opinion of SB 199 in general? Do you think it was a good solution? Do you think it's a long-term solution? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'll be honest in saying that I don't remember all the nuance of the debate. I've done a little bit of reading to refresh my memory, and I do remember the discussions that the township form of government was supposed to sunset or expire. So that's what I remember. And if at some point I say something that's crazy, please correct me, because this is, I mean, it's been a minute. So with that, if I understood correctly, the areas that had townships were essentially going to be forced to incorporate into a city. And a lot of people didn't want to do that. So my understanding and what I've reread to refresh my memory is that the metro township with municipal service district services was sort of a compromise so that there could be an incorporation, but the unincorporated areas could remain as close to the status quo as they had before if they were satisfied with the way things were going. So in that sense, I'm pretty sure the legislature did not want this to be a long-term solution, but again, self-government, right? Local government, people should have the right of self-determination. So I think this solution is as long-term as the municipal township, metro township form of government satisfies people's needs. And if and when they decide that they want to change, then they have the option to incorporate or they have the option to annex. But until that time, I don't see any issue with the metro township form of government because it seems to be meeting people's needs and they're satisfied. Now, all that being said, I did notice looking at the maps that Copperton's boundaries are kind of weird, which didn't really make any sense to me until it was pointed out that the local landowner was sort of given special treatment in the writing of that legislation so that they would be exempted from any sort of government overreach, I'm sure they would call it. Zoning, a municipality would call it. And so that's interesting. Not necessarily a fan of what that means in terms of special treatment, but it's also going to be interesting in the case of Copperton to see what that looks like as Rio Tinto eventually winds down their operations. Like what happens to all that land? What city will get it and what that process will look like, I don't know. But that's certainly something that at the county level I'll be very interested in. And again, being responsive to the people in those areas as well.
Right. And for those, there's some new folks that are joining us. This will just be casual discussion as well. You know, there's no, just to inform you of the issues as much as that. So Copperton was one of the only.
I am taking notes.
Yeah. Copperton was the only municipality that really didn't like the idea of the metro townships. But since we really made it work, we have a very good council. I'm very happy with our council. And we've done good things with it. But the question I do have for this long term, to expand on the long term, is Magna's much closer to becoming a city than, say, Kearns or Copperton.
Yeah.
And if, as cities or as the metro townships start to drop off, as Magna does and potentially possibly Kearns does, that will leave the last the white city, Copperton, Immigration Canyon, holding the bag.
Right.
So what solutions do you have? So what are the long-term solutions? Because eventually, if Immigration Canyon were to incorporate into Salt Lake City or become their own community, it would be very unlikely that White City and Copperton, if we haven't situated ourselves more healthily, would be able to remain.
Yeah.
So what is the long-term solution for that, do you think?
Well, I don't think there's a good one that's going to make everybody happy. Because economies of scale are what they are, and Copperton and White City are incredibly small. So, you know, it's one thing if you're out in the country sort of living your own best life and taking care of the community, but where you are so close to such a large metro, you would need access to more services than you would if you were more isolated. So I don't have a good answer to that.
That's all right. So that's a
good answer. So I'm open to the dialogue and conversation.
I love that answer. So the good news is that Copperton's council is working very good at keeping our budget in line and working to make it so it is something long-term sustainable. And the other good news is that Rio Tinto is working. We're working very well with Rio Tinto. I think it's the best relationship we've had in many decades. So we'd love to have, if elected, we'd love to have you working with us to talk about how we make it long-term sustainable. So on that note, let's go ahead and shift to another question. The next question, I've lost my place. Here we are. Last question I had was,
I think it might have been, yeah, I think you're good.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so Copperton has faced many tax increases. Families on fixed incomes are having a hard time keeping up. As a matter of fact, we just recently had a family move out because they could not afford the tax increase, the recent tax increases. So would you be willing to make cuts? And if so, what kind of cuts would you be willing to make in order to try to reduce the frequency and the rate of tax increases?
Yeah, so that's a tough one just because this year's budget year is such a disaster in terms of looking at trends long term. I did sort of skim through the county budget to try and have a good answer for that. I know I've talked to a couple of people who've mentioned the equestrian center in South Jordan as maybe not being a super efficient use of lands. that's certainly something I'm willing to take a look at and have a conversation about. As far as finding a thing, I also did give a call to the chief financial officer for the county to try and understand what's going on with the increases in taxes. And as far as the county, it's easy to point the finger at the county because the county does collect the revenue. But what I found that kind of surprised me that I didn't expect was that the state actually changed the law to require the county to report revenue collected and spent that the county doesn't actually touch. There's a couple of systems on the helicopter like that where, it reports something and you see it, but it doesn't belong to that system. And so this is things like the tax increase for UTA. There's some grants. There's the redevelopment agencies, and I don't know that that necessarily applies to Copperton specifically, but the UTA taxes, it would. And so the county collects the tax and then hands it off to that other agency, and it's not something that comes to the county itself. So part of that is going to be state conversation too, and saying, why are you forcing the county to do these things if it's not the county's responsibility, right? So we should be responsible for what we're responsible for and not holding the bag for other people's business. There's that. But I'm very sensitive to that too, right? The tax referendum this last year, I fought tooth and nail because as a teacher, I see students who don't have a lot of means. There's a lot of people out here in West Valley who are not well-to-do. They live paycheck to paycheck, and any increase in, the cost of food due to a tax or the cost of fuel due to a tax is incredibly harmful to the people who can least afford to bear it. And so, obviously that applies to property tax too. With property tax, there needs to be circuit breakers so that people who are on fixed incomes are spared that increase. So that's one thing that I would definitely take a look at. I know that there are property tax circuit breakers and abatements for certain groups under certain conditions. So like myself in the National Guard, because I'm military, if I'm on active duties and I'm deployed, then I can have a property tax break. It's not something I would take because I don't need that. And I recognize that if I get a break, then everybody else's taxes go up. And that's not fair because I don't need that, right? So I'm happy to shoulder the burden to help those who can't afford to, because I think that's just right. Those of us who can should be willing to help those who can't. It's just part of being in a community. Now, that also being said, I pulled my tax rates for property taxes from the last 10 years. And what I found is that the property tax rates have in fact consistently gone down. But because property tax is assessed based on relative property value, so if you're in a community where property values are rising faster than anywhere else, then your taxes go up. Whereas somebody else who's in a nice house might see a tax decrease just because of the relative value of the home. So that property tax is kind of a big mess in terms of how it works, right? So the rate, due to truth in taxation laws passed by the state legislature a number of years ago, the rates float down every single year if property values are going up. So, it's not fair to say that my income taxes were increased because I paid more money, the rate never changed. With property taxes, the rates consistently float down, but you pay more money because of the property value increase. So there's that a piece of it too. But in that conversation with the chief financial officer, I asked specifically like, hey, all right, so you exclude the stuff that's not the county's responsibility. And we factor in growth. Okay, I got it. What about inflation? And his response to me, and I need to dig into the numbers a little bit more myself to verify this, but truth in taxation laws forcing the rates down every year just maintains a revenue neutral income for the county. It does not account for inflation. And if you've been around the block for a couple of years, you've noticed that the price of food goes up, the price of gas is consistently higher than what it used to be. My grandma, when she went to the University of Utah, she paid $50 a semester. You can't get that now. You can't even get a class for $50, right? It's like $2,500 a semester and so on. So you can see inflation over a couple of generations has a tremendous impact. And the county budget, maintaining revenue neutral, all the things being equal, is in fact meaning that the amount of money that they have can do less and less each year. So they've been really efficient in terms of prioritizing projects. This year, they're not starting any new major projects, and potentially not next year, depending on how things go with the economic recovery, because the money's not there. And so that's, again, sequence and timing. If the money's not there, then you don't do those projects, but those projects are needed, right? We're going to have new growth. We're going to need new parks and trails and other services. So then it's when conditions allow, then those things would need to be put back into the budget as the money comes back into the budget. So I'm all about letting people keep as much money as possible. I think the other side of that equation is that the economy recovered after the Great Recession, but a lot of people got left behind because wages did not keep up. So people doing all the right things are falling out of the middle class, and it's not their fault. So that needs to be part of the conversation too. I mean, people should have the means to meet these requirements and contribute to the tax burden that we all share, because there's things that we want that are public goods and public services that are not really efficiently done any other way. So again, happy to have the conversation about individual budget items, but I think the county is pretty efficient with what they have, given the way that the taxation structure is set up.
Okay. Yeah. So let me add a little bit to this as well and ask you about this. So, so you are right. So the county tax, I think the last tax increase for the county was like 8 to 10 years ago, correct? The Salt Lake County has not done an actual property tax for almost a decade.
So there was one this last year, and before that it was about 8 years previous. So yeah, that's so if you figure 2% inflation a year, compound the interest, that's easily 16 to 20% decrease in the value of what they could do with the same amount of money.
Right. And so now, fair enough. I mean, in fairness, I still think that the taxes are a bit too high, but and that's fine. But what I think that the real problem is the special services districts.
Okay.
So the reason that there's been
and the police.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the reason that there feels like there has been so many tax increases is we've only been an functioning municipality for 5 years, since 2015. And every single year we have had no less than 3 tax increases.
Wow.
And that has come from police every year, fire every other year, waste management every other year, a sewage increase. So it's a death by 1,000 cuts situation.
Got it.
Now the county, I understand, has a lot of, for instance, you guys are mandated by state law to manage and maintain the Clark Planetarium. It's called the Hansen Planetarium.
Yes.
The Clark Planetarium. That's something you guys are statutorily required to do. So even if you wanted to cut the budget, you wouldn't be able to, because that money is statutorily required. And I realize that's a big portion of it. But for the police and fire, mostly police, the budgets are, for instance, the members of the Unified Police Board have been asking for a detailed analysis of the pooled services budget and have not received anything until our new CFO got involved last year. So I guess the question that I'd ask on this one is, have you had a chance to look into the special services district budgets to see if there's anything the county can do on that level, or do you have an idea of which special service district you would want to serve on? Because the county has a seat on Unified Police, Lavisa, UFSA, and all of that. Do you know which one you'd prefer to serve on, and do you have any ideas on how to make their budgets work better?
So I did try and look for their budgets on the Unified Police website. I didn't find it. I found their structure and organization, so that was a bit mind-blowing. But it makes sense just because of how things are organized. I don't have a good answer for you. I haven't looked at the budget, so I don't know. I will definitely take a look. As far as which board, I'd have to look at the list of all the boards. I do expect to at least be on the Inland Port Board, since I, as a resident of the West Side, West Valley, as close as I am to the Inland Port, Magna has that huge concern. I'd certainly expect to be on that board. As far as any other appointments, I'll have to get a sense of what are the options and where would I best fit.
And I guess how the elections go, because Max Burdick is currently serving on UPD or Slovisa, and he will not be there anymore. So I guess that's another piece
Yeah,
of
that's true too.
it. Okay. So what is your, so just to wrap up, and this will be the final question before we do before we do your closing remarks.
Okay.
But what is your view of how, so county economic development is another piece, and this is an extra question just because we have some time.
Okay.
But county economic development it does have a role in how municipalities grow and flourish, and they are contracted with the municipal services district. So what ideas do you think, partnerships or ideas do you think that we could incorporate into Copperton and Magna, Kearns area to try to grow the economy so that Copperton, Kearns, and Magna can potentially have a better standing in the future?
A better,
oh, sorry, I may have muted before that. A better standing in the future, a better long-term outlook.
okay, right, got it. So Kearns is a little tricky because they're landlocked, but there's some redevelopment happening in that area with some real potential. Magna is right next door to the inland port, so there is tremendous potential there, and we just got to get things right. And I intend to be all over that because that's my neighborhood. Like, I'm half a mile from Magna. As far as Copperton, I think you're already on track with your partnership with Rio Tinto, because that's where we're going to have to make sure that as they wind down operations, you as Copperton Township have access to the areas that used to be part of your understood jurisdiction, because it seems wrong that that was just sort of ripped away from you when those boundaries were drawn with that special treatment for that entity. So looking to the future, I would intend to engage in those conversations, obviously in consultation with your Metro Township as well, to be on the same side of things, to make sure that you have access to the land that you need in order to be viable long-term, so that you can develop in the manner that you choose, whatever that ends up looking like.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I think I have a delay. I'm in Wyoming, so please bear with me. Okay, so we'll go ahead and go to closing statements, and then I will make a couple closing remarks. So you go ahead and I'll take it away and let us know why we should vote for you.
Okay, well, I have every intention of winning this election and serving all of the communities on the west side. I'm not in it for myself, and I'm not in it for where I live in the north end of the valley. I believe, as a social studies teacher, not only in the principles of representative government, but in transparency and honesty, and actually making the effort to understand people's concerns and to speak for them honestly and openly, and when necessary, forcefully. Not afraid to do that. Definitely demonstrated that with the tax referendum. And I'll fight for what's right. You know, I've spent time in a combat zone, and local politics are annoying, but not intimidating by any stretch of the imagination. And I'm not in this for partisan points. I have no aspirations for higher office. I want to do this because I feel that the skills that I bring to the table are needed now and can make a difference, so that going forward with the proper sequence and timing, we can not just maintain the quality of life that we have, but improve it and keep this a good place to live, where people's needs are met and people can raise their families and their families can have opportunities for the future too. I mean, that speaks to education, it speaks to quality of life, it speaks to happiness. And I mean, that's corny, but we all just want to be happy. So I'll do the work, and I will absolutely be in contact and have an open line of communication with your leaders so that you have a voice at this next level on the council.
Thank you very much. And yes, so we've had Deborah Gatrell. Is that how you pronounce your last name? Gatrell?
It's Gatrell.
Gatrell.
It's Gatrell.
Okay,
it's a long A. English, not French.
No problem. Thank you. So thank you for joining us. She's running to replace Mike Jensen's vacated seat, District 2, on the County Council.
Mm-hmm.
For what it's worth, I was backing Fred Cox in the Republican primary. And I invited, I was very happy to give this opportunity to Deborah Gatrell. I think it's important to have dialogue on everything. And I can say that she has been incredibly communicative, very friendly, even in the areas that we disagree, we've been able to chat about. So I very much appreciate you joining us. And I hope if you are successful in your election, that you keep a level of tolerance and deference when you are serving. So thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to our audience who joined us as well.
Thank you, Apollo, for the invitation. And I firmly believe we should be able to have conversations, even when we disagree, where we don't need to be disagreeable. Because at the end
Absolutely.
of the day, we're all in this together, and we sink or sail together. And so, you know, the diversity of viewpoints helps us all better understand together what it is that we're dealing with, and I have no issue with that whatsoever. So I look forward to working with you.
You too. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.